every kind of music gets stagnant every once in a while, and then it comes to a point where it needs to be re-energized.
What is J. Cole's story? What is he bringing to the game?
The regular guy, everyday Joe, who can actually rap really good.
Who's Kendrick Lamar?
Kendrick Lamar is Compton, California. I mean, that's what I represent.
Because, I mean, I'm not going to lie, dude. A lot of us just straight rap fans, even old as people like me, feel that you have a chance to be like, you know, one of the dopest MCs around. One of the dopest MCs around.
The transition from the late 2000s to the early 10s was a pivotal moment in rap. It was a battle between old-fashioned lyricism against the new styles taking root in hip-hop. And it was also during this period that a lot of today's biggest stars rose from. So in this video, we'll get into the generation that almost saved rap. But first, let's get into this intro. The early 10s is only a decade back, but it seems like forever ago. It's cliche to say, but it really was a simpler time. The internet age was still beginning, SoundCloud wasn't even a thing yet, and the only way you even knew what the word clout meant was if you happened to have a large vocabulary. This era was also the last time lyricism would have mass appeal to the youth. During this time, it seemed like there was a movement forming, and a new generation of stars was on the way. However, only a few of these artists succeeded in meeting these expectations, and the movement as a whole slowly started fading away. Leading up to the early 10s, lyrical rap was in a fallen state. The mainstream sound had changed from the 90s, and the radio was dominated by club anthems. Lil Jon and the East Side Boys had popularized crunk music, a form of rap with high energy but very little attention to lyrics. T-Pain was popularizing auto-tune, and Soulja Boy had popularized dance songs with his mega viral hit, Crank That. OGs hated it all and said that hip-hop was over. Nas dropped the album called Hip Hop Is Dead, and Ice T went as far as to blame Soulja Boy for single-handedly killing it. They were exaggerating though, because there were still rappers like T.I., Lupe Fiasco, Game, and Kanye bringing lyricism to the mainstream at the time. But the rap game as a whole seemed like it was trending away from lyricism and more towards club music. Things didn't look bright, but there was some hope. In 2009, Drake dropped So Far Gone and made it clear that he was up next. J. Cole signed to Roc Nation and dropped his classic mixtape, The Warm Up, and Tyler the Creator dropped his debut mixtape, Bastard, gaining critical acclaim and starting the Odd Future takeover that would proceed throughout the early 10s. Starting in the 10s, Drake quickly established himself as one of the top stars in rap, with albums like Thank Me Later and Take Care. J. Cole was also on his way to becoming a star. He dropped another classic mixtape called Friday Night Lights and appeared on the 2010 XXL freshman cover, which at this time actually meant something. In 2011, he dropped his debut album Cold World, The Sideline Story. Around the same time, a West Coast rap collective called Black Hippie was emerging. At this time, J-Rock was the biggest artist, with several songs, including a Wayne feature, and his buzz had earned him a spot on the 2010 XXL cover with J. Cole. But alongside J-Rock, Schoolboy Q and a young Kendrick Lamar were patiently waiting for their turn to shine. In 2010, Kendrick Lamar dropped his first official project on TDE, Overly Dedicated, and started gaining notice. In 2011, he followed this up with his debut album Section 80, adding on to the growing buzz. Also in 2011, Schoolboy Q dropped his first TDE project, Setbacks, and the Black Hippie Collective had a lot of mystery and anticipation about what would come next. On the same coast but on a completely different wavelength, Odd Future was taking over the mainstream. Tyler's debut mixtape had put the spotlight on the group, and in 2010, Earl Sweatshirt dropped his debut mixtape, Earl. And in 2011, Frank dropped his debut mixtape, Nostalgia Ultra, and Tyler dropped his debut album, Goblin, seeing a lot of success, reaching number 5 on Billboard. Odd Future was becoming a cultural movement, and kids across the country were starting to pop up with the colorful Odd Future merch. In 2012, they dropped the Odd Future Tape Volume 2 and hit an all-time high in popularity, becoming arguably the most influential group in rap. But over on the East Coast, another big hip-hop collective was on the verge of taking over. In 2011, A$AP Rocky dropped Purple Swag and Peso, combining New York style with Southern sound. He was talented, had confidence and charisma, and made dope music that no one had ever heard from a New Yorker before, and he began to blow up. He dropped his debut mixtape Live Love ASAP in October, and many believed he was destined to be a superstar. As Rocky's buzz was growing, the influence of ASAP Mob was also growing and branching out in all different directions, from music to fashion. In 2013, ASAP Rocky dropped Long Live ASAP, and ASAP Ferg's single Work blew up. The Mob was at the top of the world and at their peak as far as influence. Also in New York, on a smaller scale, Pro Era was rising as a rap collective. In 2012, Joey Badass had exploded onto the scene at 17 years old with his 1999 mixtape. The mixtape was an instant classic, and people were praising him for bringing back the sound of the 90s and predicting his rise to stardom. In 2013, it seemed like lyricism was on its way back to being front and center in the mainstream. Culturally, Odd Future and ASAP Mob had influence over a large percentage of the youth, and there was a wave of young stars who seemed destined for greatness. Drake had already made it, taking the lyrical route to become a major star, and it appeared that Tyler, Earl, Kendrick, Q, Cole, Rocky, and Joey would be the next to take over the mainstream and collectively bring back lyricism to the charts. But this wasn't exactly how things would end up playing out. Joey was never able to grow as big as many believed he would, partly due to the fact that he stayed independent and partly due to the fact that he suffered the Illmatic curse, and nothing he ever dropped ever topped 1999. He slowed down dropping music, and after 2017 took a 5-year break from music altogether. Earl and Rocky's careers mirrored each other in a lot of ways. Rocky had the potential to become a generational star, and Earl had the talent and following to become a mainstream multi-platinum artist. But they both rejected these routes, choosing instead to continue to experiment and take creative risks that the mainstream would not embrace. And over the years, they would drop less and less frequently. 2 years after his universally loved debut album in 2015, ASAP Rocky dropped his sophomore album, At Long Last ASAP, which was much more experimental in sound and less well received by fans. After this, he went on a 3-year hiatus before dropping another album called Testing in 2018, which was also very experimental. The album alienated a lot of casual listeners, and even many of Rocky's fans viewed it as underwhelming. And after this album, Rocky went on another hiatus, and at the time of making this video, it's been 4 years and he has yet to release another album. Earl followed his debut album Doris with I Don't Like Shit, I Don't Go Outside in 2015, which sonically wasn't extremely different from his first album. However, this album wasn't as popular, moving 30,000 first week, a good amount less than the 49,000 Doris move. Similarly to ASAP Rocky, Earl took a 3-year hiatus before returning in 2018 to drop an album called Some Rap Songs. This album was free from structure and more experimental than his previous two. In 2020, he followed this up with Feet of Clay, his most experimental album ever, an album which Earl rapped over all types of weird samples from strangely chopped strings to offbeat accordion loops. This album alienated a lot of fans, but by this point, Earl had already proved that he didn't really care about his music being popular. Schoolboy Q was another artist whose wave faded away throughout the years. In 2013, Schoolboy Q was on fire, dropping some of his biggest songs like Collard Greens and Man of the Year, as well as collaborations with ASAP Mob like Ferg's Work remix. He capitalized on all this hype when he dropped Oxymoron in 2014, going #1 on Billboard and moving 139,000 first week. However, this would be his peak. After the album, he took a 2-year hiatus and returned in 2016 with Blank Face LP. The album wasn't received as well and only sold 74,000 units. And after this album, he took a 3-year hiatus before returning in 2019 with Crash Talk, an album that was received well but not nearly as much as Oxymoron 5 years prior. Schoolboy Q chose to fall back, and as of the time of this video, has yet to release another album. Joey Badass, Earl Sweatshirt, ASAP Rocky, and Schoolboy Q definitely didn't fall off. They all have reached levels of success that the majority of rappers dream of. Every time they drop quality music. But for one reason or another, this music just didn't connect with the mainstream. In 2013, people expected them to become megastars, but they either failed to make the music necessary to reach these expectations, or simply never tried. Even though these artists didn't meet these expectations, others did, and some ended up going farther than anyone ever imagined. Tyler the Creator continued to evolve throughout the years. From 2013 to 2015, he switched his style drastically, dropping Cherry Bomb, an album that was significantly different from Wolf. Then from 2015 to 2017, he continued his musical growth, dropping Flower Boy. He was still experimental with his sound and the music he was making, but still managed to appeal to a wide mainstream audience and was establishing himself as a generational artist. He dropped Ego in 2019 and Call Me If You Get Lost in 2021 and started getting the recognition he deserved, earning Grammys on both of these albums for Rap Album of the Year. Tyler didn't reach the very top to see Drake levels of popularity, but he definitely grew into a big star and one of the best artists of the generation. An artist from the early 10s who would reach the Drake level of success was J. Cole. Up into 2013, J. Cole had put in all the groundwork, dropping classic mixtapes like The Warm Up, The Come Up, Friday Night Lights, as well as his debut album, Cold World. But in 2013, he dropped Born Sinner and ascended to a new level. An album that was basically perfect from start to finish and had several radio hits, but didn't compromise lyrically or message-wise. This album certified him as a legitimate star. The next year, Cole followed this up with another near-perfect album, with 2014 Forest Hills Drive. Now at this point, Cole had locked himself into GOAT status to many in the hip-hop world. His later albums weren't received quite as well, and For Your Eyes Only and KOD received their fair share of criticism, but J. Cole had already stamped his legacy and continued to hold his position in the top 3 of rap. Similar to Cole with Born Sinner, when Kendrick dropped Good Kid, Mad City and was able to catch the mainstream ear with hits like Swimming Pool, Don't Kill My Vibe, and Poetic Justice, but still rap at the highest level and tell a detailed story throughout his album, it took him to rap star status. He took a 3-year hiatus and came back with another masterpiece with To Pimp a Butterfly, rapping about deep personal topics over funkadelic samples and still seeing the pinnacle of mainstream success. It was around this time that he convinced many that he was the greatest to ever touch a mic. In 2017, he dropped Damn, another classic album, and disappeared at the top of his career, leaving fans begging for music for 5 years before he came back with Mr. Morales. Kendrick and Cole had answered the prayers of hip-hop heads across the country. They blew up in the early 10s lyricism resurgence wave and met the expectations placed on new rappers from the time, growing into megastars alongside Drake, without compromising their lyrical ability or message. But sadly, this still wasn't enough. 3 megastars wasn't enough to change the tide of hip-hop, and lyricism never became a trend. Even at the peak of this early 10s movement, Chief Keef had more influence on the youth than any single one of these rappers. And as time went on and Kendrick and Cole became the biggest rappers in the world, rappers like the Migos, Young Thug, and Future would still have a bigger influence on the up-and-coming wave of rappers, inspiring more rappers to come out rapping on trap beats with auto-tune and a triplet flow. Lyricism still remains at the top of hip-hop, with Cole, Kendrick, and Drake being the top 3 rappers. But this is largely because of rap fans over the age of 25. Since the 2000s, the youth have become more and more disconnected with lyricism, and as a result, most rappers who take the lyricism route stay in the underground. Drake didn't become the biggest artist in the world because of lyricism. He got there making commercial hits, sacrificing some lyricism and consciousness for wider appeal. The era of the mainstream lyricist is slowly fading away. The early 10s was a mini golden age for hip-hop, and a period where a lot of today's most influential artists emerged. And even though they weren't able to change the direction of rap, they still made a big impact on the culture and are an important part of history.